Yes, we are. All right, so we're officially live.
Hi.
So welcome everybody. So I'm going to introduce Justin and Mitch in a second. This stream is going to be about Django. We're going to be talking about Django as far as 2021. Give some backgrounds, the projects that we use, what we do with Django, things that we've accomplished, and what we've seen. And yeah, it's just going to be an open conversation about Django. So I wanted to primarily focus on that because that's where most of my audience is. And it's obviously the most highly requested topic for a live stream. So, oh, I'm live here. Nice, Mitch.
Yep. Dennis Ivy. It won't focus, but it's there. We're live.
So just before this conversation, we're trying to figure out what a woggle was. So, Mitch, you have the official definition, right?
I did. I closed it, but
okay. Well,
we were talking about the under part of a neck because Justin was telling us about his double chin, and I said it's called a woggle, but I think it must be a Canadian thing because I just Googled it, and there's no definition that clearly says that the under part of a neck is a woggle. But I don't care because it's funny,
right,
and I'm going to continue to call it a woggle.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, so that's how our conversation started, everybody. Welcome to the stream.
That is a dad bod neck is what I should be calling it.
All right. So back to Django then. Justin, I'll just give your background and Mitch. So Justin, it's really cool to have you here. I did my first live stream actually on your channel, and sounds like Mitch and I both learned from you. So that's pretty neat. Like you got me started about 2 years ago just following your channel. You have an awesome channel, Coding Entrepreneurs, and you're doing great things there. You do a lot of Django stuff in Python. And Mitch, I've been following your course on, you're building out like a social platform with Django, and you built it out. You're using the Django REST framework, and it's like this chat app with instant messaging and so on. So I want to get into those two, and I also want to get into Justin's channel. So Justin, since you're kind of the granddaddy of us right here,
Papa Justin.
You led us into Django. You want to open up with maybe why you use Django, why Django with Python, and do you still use it today? And if you do, what do you use it for?
Oh, I'm the opener, huh? I thought it was the closer.
Papa J. Mitch. Papa J. Mitch. Lay it down.
Dennis, thanks for having me. Sooner or later, Mitch will just let me talk. We'll see. No, I think we have a lot of credit due to the developers and the continuous support from the Django community at large. Without them, I wouldn't have ever found Django, right? Python is an obvious choice for beginners because of its syntax. I was lucky enough to stumble on it. At the time, Ruby on Rails and PHP were all the rage. They didn't fit with me. So I found Django and I built a project with it. And I was just hooked. So I've been using it for, I want to say since Django version 1.2. So I'm not sure exactly when that was, maybe about 10 years ago or so. And then I started teaching probably around Django 1.4. So I've seen Django for a long time. Really, really enjoy using it. I still use it on all of my projects pretty much that require user authentication. So if there's user authentication required, Django is by far the easiest way to do it, in my opinion. And so codingforentrepreneurs.com, my main website, that's on Django. I'm really looking forward to all the asynchronous stuff that's coming out. So much stuff with Django that's happening that's really exciting. But it's also Python related too. So there's a lot of stuff with Python that's happening that's really exciting as well. I'm just excited to see what other people build, and it's always humbling to hear where some of my previous students have gone, right? So you guys, you learned with me, but you still did all the work, right? So like I gave you the door, you just walked through it, like if you're going to quote Morpheus or something.
Oh yeah,
so
Morpheus.
So like I think you guys are good examples of what everybody else could do is if you take on a project and then you decide, oh, I really want to get better at this. A good way to do that is to just teach it. And you guys are really good examples of that. So that's a long-winded way saying thank you, Dennis, for having me on here. And I'm really excited, like I said, about 100 times. I haven't had enough coffee yet, so.
Drink some more.
Yeah, get it in you. I guess I should introduce myself. Hi, I'm Mitch. My YouTube channel is Coding with Mitch. I don't really do a lot of Django stuff. I more use Django as a means to an end regarding like my Android project. So I do Android stuff. Usually I like to build like my own backend to interact with the apps that I build, as opposed to using like Firebase or something like that. Because I think realistically, Firebase is just, it's great. Like, it's a great product. It gets stuff done fast. I think really Firebase's purpose though is to build MVPs, because it gets it out fast. You don't need a lot of knowledge. But if you use Firebase, you can acquire a lot of costs. So it like, they racks up really quickly. So I like to build my own backends. I use Django for that. And it's really like a means to have somewhere that my apps can communicate with. Also, I built my website with Django though, which I learned from Mitch here. And I don't know if I'd even have a website, to be honest, if you didn't have those courses. It helped me so much. Or maybe I should say it accelerated my learning, probably like, 100% or something. So thanks for that. And thanks for having me on, Dennis.
Yeah, of course. So you're building out, you're building out Android applications, right? So you're building out APIs. And what are you building out the app with? What language? Did you mention that? I didn't catch that.
No. So, Android used to be with Java, but recently Kotlin. Last couple of years, everyone started using Kotlin, which is generally just it's the same. Like, it's very, very similar to Java. It just gives you like a better developer experience, I would say. Like, just simply the pleasure of writing a line of Kotlin is much higher than writing a line of Java. That's really like what it comes down to. I don't think functionality wise, there's really much difference. You can get the same thing done with Java as you can with Kotlin. It's just easier, basically. And now there's like all these cross-platform things coming out too. Flutter is my favorite. I'm going to be spending a lot of time on Flutter. But these days, generally, if I'm going to build an Android app, it's going to be with Kotlin. But like I said, pretty soon I'm going to be spending a lot of time on Flutter because it looks really awesome. Also too, recently Android came out with this new UI building tool called Jetpack Compose, which is a declarative way to build UIs exactly like Flutter. So they basically, what I see is they took like the good things from Flutter, which people were saying like this is a much better way to do it, and now they're implementing it in the native platform, which is awesome. And that's what I've been doing in the last month and a half, is building a course using that Jetpack Compose.
So that's a really cool example, because a lot of people, a lot of beginners struggle with like the purpose of Django and what it's used for. And you're the perfect example of, you're actually building out applications like mobile apps. So a lot of people think it's just for websites. They don't really understand like the full purpose of it. But when you build out, or when you're using something like the Django REST framework or that part of it, you can use that API for anything. So that's a perfect example. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to, I think generally like with Django too, you don't like for your probably 90% of use cases when a business needs a website, you don't need to build a Django website. It's just like too much. They don't need all of that. Probably like
what kind of business though, Mitch? Huh?
Oh, like I don't know. You're
mom and pop
tiny,
shop.
Yeah, like a little mom and pop shop. They need like a listing to come up on Google when people Google it, so that they can call and like look at the website and just be like,
are you saying a static website?
Yeah, basically a static website.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Like for me personally, it'd be easier to build a Django site, but like I haven't used WordPress in so long that it'd probably take me longer to do that.
It'd probably take you 3 hours to know everything there is to know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm familiar with this still, but
yeah.
Well, but the thing is, if you're building a local business a site, they're going to want to control the content on it, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, unless you want to be locked into them, which is something that's a strategy. But I mean, being able to change the content is incredibly important. Django has the admin built in, obviously, but something like Shopify or WordPress, they're just so easy, and there's so much support around it. So if you were doing a local businesses thing, I actually think that WordPress and Shopify are really, really good.
Or Square, like whatever. Pick your company, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just something that, because the company itself, like if you're like, I want to advertise something on the internet, should I learn Django for a simple static website? Well, yes, you should learn something that you're interested in. That's for sure. But to actually get it going, one of those paid services are great because you've got teams of developers to make sure that all of their customer stuff is up. Where the three of us, if we deploy a Django project, we are the ones, or our team or whatever, have to make sure that that's up and running all the time.
Exactly.
And if you're doing that for a customer, it's probably not the best thing to advise them to use.
You'd have to charge
unless
them,
you're managing it.
you'd have to charge them too much money. Like for it to make it worth your while to maintain that product, you'd have to charge them too much money. It would not be worth it. Whereas if they could go to like even Square, I just went on Square like a week ago just to like see what it was all about, like all their new stuff. You can like within like an hour, I had a website up that accepted payments.
Yep.
Like that's insane.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
for your average mom and pop static website, business website, that is probably the direction they want to go. And then, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so I was just going to say, to make my answer clear, I'm still on the use WordPress and whatever's out there because I made a video on that topic actually. But for me personally, just because of my experience, I still stick to Django because I like it. But yeah, I 100% agree with you guys. Like if it's something simple, use something that's already out there that has that support.
But then like if you're building anything that needs an app, but then it's a done deal, then you probably shouldn't use any of these services because you need the back end. Anything that needs like that custom logic of any kind, which is, you know, that other 10% probably, then you gotta build the website, you gotta build the back end, you gotta have services, you gotta have all that other stuff that is not easy to set up. So you can't use WordPress.
Okay.
Unless, of course, it gets in the way of you actually releasing what you're trying to do, right? So if you're trying to sell T-shirts and you want to have an app at some point, well, just sell your T-shirts. Get those out as soon as possible because vendor lock-in is real. So if you sign up for Shopify, you might get stuck there for a long time. But it's also not impossible to leave those things and move over to Django or move over to some other application. I think that's really important. Django's the same way. So yeah, you could start off in Django and be like, oh, I want to do something different now. I want to move to Firebase. That's absolutely possible to happen. To me, it's like the perfect is the enemy of good, right? So if you build something that's good enough to get whatever your project is out there and running, that's the critical thing, right? It's not so much the technology. I mean, all of us could talk about which is the best choice for the technology, but it's really hard to say because it's based off of the project and also the point of just getting it out there as quickly as possible, right?
Yeah, I like that. It was perfect is the enemy of progress. Is that what you said? It was. I've heard the term perfection.
Perfect is the enemy of good.
Yeah. I've heard it as perfection is the enemy of progress. Like if you're trying to perfect it, you're never going to perfect something, or you'll always find something more to do and never get it done. Yeah.
Get it out there.
Yeah.
Like priority one is get it, ship it. Like get it out there.
Ship it. Always
worry about. Yeah. But then like that brings all kinds of problems too. Like I deal with problems at least once a month. There's like some problem on my website where I'm like, fuck, why did I build it that way? And I know that I built it that way because I was like, just get it done, get it out there, ship it. And then now like over time you pay for that. But I mean, that's the trade-off. Like it's like move as quickly you can to revenue and then worry about the problems after.
Well, the question is, what kind of shit sandwich do you want to eat? Right. Mark Manson talks about this in his book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I definitely recommend
that's a good book.
That.
Yeah.
You guys just demonetized me.
Huh?
I said you guys just demonetized. No, you're good.
Oh, you're right.
Sorry, Dennis.
You're good. I don't monetize the streams anyway, so
okay.
We gotta bleep ourselves. Sorry, Dennis.
No, you can't bleep live.
Mitch gets me going. You know. What I mean? Anyway, what kind of SHIT sandwich are you going to eat? And that sandwich is like, you get to pick these things, right? So what is the challenge that you want to undertake? And I think, Mitch, to your point, you look back on some of this old code that is like just spaghetti. I don't know a single developer that doesn't do that, right? Like I was looking at a project recently and I'm like, what freelancer did I hire that did this shit? You know? And I'm like, oh wait, that is definitely what I did. I definitely did that. Oh man, that's really
funny.
bad. You know?
It's funny if that's hilarious. Oh my God. Do you actually hire freelancers to do stuff like that?
I have in the past. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny.
From time to time, it just depends on what it is, but yes, I have.
They look back. I definitely was not dumb enough to do this. Oh no, it was me. Never mind.
Yes. I mean, and I just did a big migration from my website. We can talk about it, but there was just so many little things that I did, but it was from 5 years ago, and it was in the name of, hey, I need to get it out there. And I haven't really looked at it since because there wasn't really a need for it in some cases. But now I'm like combing through it, just making it more efficient, a better code, preparing it for more asynchronous code and all that.
Right.
And you just see so many things left and right where it's like, man, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's so bad. And also at the same time, it's like I teach people Django. Like I should not have this in here. But you know what? I'm a developer. I'm a human.
Yeah.
I have these problems too. And I think it's completely normal to have crappy code throughout your site. It's just about acknowledging that you will have that and just actively being okay with improving it over time.
Yeah, that's interesting because you're always improving. And I have that too, where like there's something I'll teach in a video and like a month after learning something new, I'm like, damn, why did I teach it that way? Like now I have people relying on that and you do want to make the updates, but that's always interesting because you're improving. That's just showing the natural process of that.
For me, when that, I have the exact same thing happen to me like all the time. And that's just the way it goes. Something new comes out and what are you going to do? For me, I have the Discord channel and I have all my members in there. And so I make sure to tell them, I'm like, hey, I talked about this thing. Probably don't do it that way. Do it this way. And then a little bit lighter of a conscience, I guess.
Yeah. So, Justin, you mentioned async. Django came out with its updates a year ago now, as far as 3.0. Do you, since you're the one that you're kind of like the Django master of us two here, at least, what are some updates you guys are seeing, or what are you seeing from Django 3.0 async? I know we talked about this in our last stream. I know not much has changed, but what are some things that you're seeing and maybe things that you're going to see in the future that maybe you've noticed?
Yeah, I mean, they're just going to have more and more support for asynchronous Django, completely the entire stack all the way down to the database. Mm-hmm. But it's going to take some time to get there. And the other cool thing is they are committed to non-asynchronous code as well. So synchronous code, which is like great for anyone learning now, or even if you learned Django 5 years ago, that means the vast majority of your Django code from 5 years ago is still going to work today. Yes, you'll have to make some changes. There's like minor bugs that you have to change, but like that is something that I really appreciate about Django. They don't just blow up the whole thing because a new hot thing comes out, right? So like asynchronous code is cool, but if you don't really know how to write efficient synchronous code, you're definitely not going to be able to write efficient asynchronous code. And you might not even be writing proper asynchronous code, even if it has an asynchronous function in front of it. So I think a lot of our asynchronous flag, excuse me, is that what it's called? It's called an asynchronous flag right in front of the define function. I'm going blank on what that's called.
Async, is it a decorator?
Identifier? I don't know. I call it some kind of identifier. It says, hey, this is async. This function is async.
I feel like I should know that.
I don't know.
I don't know what the term is called. I'm pretty sure it's not a decorator, but maybe it is. Maybe it's just a different kind of decorator. Anyways, that little thing. I mean, if you have that on there and you're writing it, you can still use that as like synchronous code or the way you actually code it. So it's a little tricky to get that right. It's also tricky to diagnose problems with asynchronous code. So I think as a beginner, still using synchronous Django is great. You can use asynchronous views. That's not that big of a deal, but you have to make sure that when you're using the database in there, you're doing it safely and you're not overloading the database, because that's a common thing that happens that Django developers talk about all the time. Andrew Goodwin did a really good talk earlier last year about all of this stuff. I highly recommend you guys check it out if you haven't already. It was like PyCon Australia, I think it was, but he was nobody went anywhere, so he was just in his house. But he's talking about all the things that they're working on in the Django core development team. And I believe Andrew Goodwin was instrumental in getting Django channels as a part of Django itself, or the Django core development team, or as an official Django project, that is. So asynchronous is really cool, but the question is, like, does it really benefit you if you have to spend 3 times as long trying to figure out asynchronous stuff versus just a synchronous function of some kind? And most of the time, I'd say no. If you're a little bit more advanced, then yeah, probably you will get a lot of benefit from using async. I don't know, Mitch. How about you? Do you think about it that way too?
I think it's, if you're a beginner, it's just not worth looking into, because the thing, like, I think you made a lot of good points there. It's going to be tougher to debug because you're essentially playing around with different threads. Like, things can go and happen on different threads, and you don't necessarily know what's happening. Multiple things can be happening at the same time. It's not just going A, B, C, D, E. It might be like A, C, D. It's like, could be all over the place depending on the work that you're doing. So synchronous is probably the answer if you're a beginner. And then, yeah, I mean, move to async. You really don't need async for most things. Like in a Django view, you probably don't need to have things happen asynchronously anyway, because you're not doing like a bunch of heavy operations waiting for a result. You know, it's probably fine just to go top to bottom like you regularly do. It's logical. It makes sense. You know.
Do you use it in your latest course? So that social network that you built out, what was that? Can you?
It's just a chat. It's just a chat website. What is it? Open-chat.xyz. So I built this because I wanted to build something with sockets, and I saw that Django Channels 2 came out recently. So I said, okay, I know Django. Let me build a real-time chat website. So if you guys want to go there right now, you can go to open-chat.xyz. It's not like an incredible website or anything, but it's got authentication, it's got some chat. So you could like just create an account, log in, and you could go to like the homepage, which is a public chat. It's a public real-time chat. You can go in there. You can click on people's profiles, add them, like Facebook, like you send a friend request. People got to accept the friend request. Then you become friends and you can private chat. Yeah, so I did use the async version of the Django Channels 2 stuff, but I didn't need to. There was really no reason for me to use it. I only used it because I know that Python and Django is headed in the async direction, and I'm like, okay, I know how to use the things, so I thought, why don't I just use it, even though it makes no difference.
That was my question. Is did you use async with this? So I'm not signed in. I have the application.
Go register. Just go up to the top. Go to register.
I think I registered at one point. So I want to say that again. That's open-chat.xyz. So I think you can see that in.
Yeah, I see it.
Try to zoom in. Okay, so if anyone wants to check that out, so that's really cool. That's really interesting. I like that.
Yeah, I wanted to play around with WebSockets, and I was going to build a real-time chat app to then communicate with the website. Like I said in the introduction of this stream, that's generally what I like to do. I'll build like some kind of a back-end system and then build an app to communicate with that back-end system. So my intention was to build the real-time chat website, you know, have like a social network website with real-time chat. But I got distracted because Jetpack Compose came out, so I wanted to play with that. So I'm going to build an app to communicate with this website, but I just haven't yet.
Cool. I like that.
I'm signed in now, so here you'll see, hey, it's Mitch down in the real-time chat.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Looks like somebody else.
I really hope that Python comes out with a similar thing as use state in JavaScript, or specifically React. JS. Are you guys familiar with this?
No, what's that?
Use state, yeah, with React.
Yeah, so it makes it a little bit easier to see how asynchronous changes affect a function. Python doesn't necessarily have that in the way. If you don't know what it is, it's hard to like kind of explain how it works, but like without showing you specifically, you know what I mean? But the asynchronous features of Python, I think, can be improved much and take a lot of the inspiration from JavaScript, because really, I mean, a lot of the front ends do all of this asynchronous stuff because of JavaScript, or at least front end websites. And that's where you get a lot of the benefit is having the asynchronous stuff happen on the client side and not necessarily on the back end, right?
I wasn't paying attention, to be honest. I was looking at the chat. Sorry.
No,
you're killing me, Mitch.
Sorry. We all just kind of looked at each other there, and I was like, damn it, I wasn't listening.
I just agreed with the point. I understood it.
Okay.
So I do want to get into front-end frameworks in a second because you mentioned React. But before that, because I want to kind of knock out the Django topics first, even though that is connected to Django, what do you think about FastAPI and GraphQL with Django? So I personally stick to the Django REST framework. I like using that. There's no need for anything else for me, at least, just because I'm familiar with it. But GraphQL seems like a good topic, and FastAPI I don't know much about. So how does that go with Django 3.0 and up? And what do you guys think about those topics? Like, are they going to replace Django REST, the Django REST framework? What do you guys see that? Where do you see that going?
Mitch, I'll let you take this one.
Oh, okay. I don't really know a lot. To be honest, I've barely looked at GraphQL. I have never touched React. One of the questions I wanted to ask Justin actually was if he uses front-end frameworks like React, or if he ever has used a front-end framework like React, because I have friends who have used it, and I always try to like show them Django because I think it's like the best, but really I haven't tried anything else, so it's kind of an unfounded thought. So I always wondered like what I wanted to talk to somebody who's used both, because I just don't know. I'm curious myself.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, Mitch, there, where I don't really go into new things that often. Like once I find something that I like, I just stick to it because I don't want to over-engineer it or add too much to that.
You sound like developers.
Yeah, I'm just like, well, Django does everything I want it to do, so why would I look at some other thing?
So, Justin, have you looked at FastAPI since we last talked? I know in our last stream we mentioned it. I don't think you looked at it, right? Or you haven't used it?
No, I've been using it for a few years now, actually.
Okay.
I just don't teach on it yet. Maybe that's what we talked about.
Gotcha.
Or I think I might have used it in one project or something. But FastAPI and Flask kind of do a lot of the same things. FastAPI is built towards actually creating a REST API. Like that's what it's built for. So Flask, on the other hand, is closer to where it's like edging towards Django, where you build a HTML web page. It's not a REST API; it's an HTML web page. Both of them can do the same thing, right? So it's just a micro framework. It just makes it really easy and fast to get these things up and going. So a good use case for FastAPI is actually serving a deep learning model or a machine learning model, either one. Or I guess machine learning is part of deep learning is part of machine learning, but you can serve models on FastAPI or Flask to handle those things. So it's not on your core Django project if you're using Django as well. That's one of the easiest ways to do it. But in talking about rapid prototyping, if you don't need user authentication, but you have all sorts of API types of things that you need. When I say user authentication, I mean like you're signing up users. I don't mean like you authenticate with your own app. I mean signing up users. So that's a good use case of using FastAPI, is just to build something really, really fast. You get it out there, and so your front end or whatever client you're using can actually consume that API. So even if you're prototyping something quickly that you will then later put into a Django project, you totally can do that. And FastAPI is great for that. And then if you use a service like Google Cloud Run for serverless functions or serverless Docker, it's like even better, because then you can just let it sit there, and now you have an API that's just sitting there that you don't pay for unless you use it. So that's another cool part about this like using some of these smaller frameworks, because there's not as much overhead in actually building those things out. And I've had a number of students that they got hooked because of Flask and FastAPI, because they already knew a little bit about Python. All you need to do is make a Python function with a couple different decorators, and boom, you now have a web application. Where Django, it is just not that simple, because there's a lot of batteries built into it. So that's my thoughts of FastAPI. I think it's a great framework, definitely worth playing around with, especially if you're just a new Python beginner. That's also true for Flask. There's also one called AIO HTTP, very similar. There's a lot of these little micro frameworks in Python that are awesome. They're really cool. And I'm actively looking at them all the time because, number one, I get students that ask about them a lot. And number two, there's things that these things do well that Django might not, or some of the tools that we use otherwise might not, that you can start to think about how to like reshape your project because of what these tools do well. And that's how I found Adam Johnson's blog post on a single page Django application, where it's essentially like a Flask app or a FastAPI app, but it's in Django. It's really cool. It's definitely worth checking out.
So what about user authentication for FastAPI?
You totally can do it. It's just a lot more layers of complexity, and using third party. It's like not a natively supported package into FastAPI or Flask, right? You have to use third party packages to do that. And that's why I like using Django for those things, is because Django is opinionated about it, and they have all of their whole stack together. So all the security, the clickjacking, all those things are in there by default, right? So that's where I lean towards using Django if you're having a bunch of users using that application as your main point of an application. But again, with FastAPI and Flask, you can make microservices and have Django communicate to all of those things. It doesn't all have to be bundled in Django. That's a monolith. That's starting to get a really big project that has a lot of points of failure, which is unfortunate because that's what you want to do. You don't want to actually move out and start doing something different. You want to just use the thing that you're comfortable with. But unfortunately, it's not always the best architecture to build out. So
you're saying like a better way to do it in your opinion would be to like, you're sort of like applying separation of concerns to like the most parts of your project possible. Like you're going to separate your user authentication to some kind of another service. Then you're going to build like your core service, which is going to talk to that service, get its information from there. If you want to add another feature on top of that, you know, get another service for that, which would then communicate with the other two. That's kind of what you're saying, right? You're separating everything out.
Potentially, right? Because if you're doing it by yourself, trying to manage all of these different services, these disparate services, can get really complicated. That's why there's tools like Kubernetes and Docker, which we could talk about. But if you have, let's say you have a Django project and you have a bunch of different services in that, but then you want to add something like video processing, for example, right? Well, what are you going to do? Are you going to put it in your Django project? Well, your intuition might be, yes, I'll put it in my Django project and have maybe using Celery and some worker process to actually run those things. Mm-hmm. If you need clarification, just let me know. But what you would probably want to do is either use a third-party service like on AWS or GCP or all of the other ones that
Google
actually
Cloud,
do video
whatever.
processing. Yes, exactly. You could totally use one of those third-party services, but you're like, no, I'm doing video processing in a specific way. I built this application in OpenCV or all these things. I want my own. That is a really good opportunity to be like, okay, I'm going to leave my Django project alone, and I'm going to think of this as a whole new service, and I'm going to put it in its own, whether it's a virtual machine or a Google Cloud Run or whatever. You just completely separate that service from your Django project, because if that video processing service dies, which is probably going to happen because everything goes wrong all the time, right? So if it dies, then your Django project isn't dead, right? Like everything else on your Django project is still working. And that's critical, right? You have to think of like, how do you make a resilient architecture with your app, or at least on the application layer? Like, how do you do that? And an easy way is to not overload your single application with a bunch of services that should be functioning by themselves, right?
That makes sense. That's very logical.
I mean, there's some people that think this is kind of, there's like people that are absolutely opposed to using something like Django and think you should only do microservices, like having an individual service for each aspect of your site. Yeah. So if you look at something like AWS, it's actually a lot like this. They have a bunch of different services for all the possible things that you could use for any one project. And those are all disparate, right? You can use them separately or individually or all together or whatever. So there is that philosophy that, maybe we separate everything out. But that adds so much complexity. And if you have a big team, then sure. Yeah. It's kind of a balance, because I'm sure, like Instagram, for example, I believe even to this day still uses Django as their backend. Yes, they have other services like I just mentioned, but Django is still their core backend, which is pretty phenomenal. Pinterest, I think, is the same way, but they absolutely have these other services that are supporting it in a similar architecture that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I think it sounds like, to me, it's like, how much resources do you have? Because to have all of these other services, that's a lot of overhead for a developer. Like probably a lot of them, if you're a Python developer, probably a lot of them you could build with Python and then have those services running on one of the platforms that you just mentioned. But probably some of them can't be, depending on the thing. If you were a solo developer and you don't have like massive amounts of users and traffic, putting everything in one project probably isn't a big deal, because something goes wrong, what's going to happen? Your users are going to email you. They're going to say your website is broken. You're going to say, oh shit. You're going to go to the website and fix it because you know everything. And within, like an hour, it's probably fixed. Whereas if you have 20 microservices, you're like, that's a much bigger thing than to have, as a solo developer. Whereas if you had a team, the complaint comes in, they'd say, okay, ship that to, whatever team built that service. They fix it. It makes more sense that way. So it's really like, volume. How much volume do you have?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. Absolutely.
I don't know. That's the things I was thinking of when you were talking anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these tools that we have allow us to create that volume. And in some cases, you can make a really resilient tool with not a lot of, you don't necessarily need to have a big team to do all these things, but it just goes back to what kind of shit sandwich do you want? Would you rather upset your users and have your entire site down? Or would you rather be like, oh, this one feature is not working, so only a few users are upset, not all of yours, Yeah. So there's definitely trade-offs of both, but I think the vast majority of beginners, if you're worrying about this now, don't worry about it. Just make everything in Django. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Make it work. Just make it work before you make it optimized,
So I'm seeing some questions about React and Vue. So I kind of wanted to jump into that. We mentioned that like 5 minutes ago. Justin, you're codingforentrepreneurs.com website. That's in React, right? Is it in the front end?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So it's a course platform. I've also built mine recently in React too. So I'm
nice.
Having all my courses separated. There's a payment, gateway there. So let's talk about React, Vue, and Angular. I guess those are the bigger front end frameworks that everybody wants to kind of hear about. The one I haven't used is Vue. So I'm more of a React backend there. So I've used it at work before. I currently use it a lot, and I'm making a course on that. What do you, Mitch? I know you don't use React, right?
No,
so
I want to know. I want to know what you guys.
Yeah.
I'm ready to listen because I've never used it. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, I always have a hard time answering like when you use it, right? Like if I can find the perfect situations, I can usually give examples on when you might want to use React with Django. But do you have any good examples, Justin, like of when that might be beneficial? We talked about single page applications, maybe speeding something up because it is a much faster. I've noticed my React applications, the way I'm calling my API makes things way quicker.
Yeah. So if you want more control over your user interface, as in you want it to feel more native. Now, Mitch, you would know this well with Android applications, like it already is native, right? So the web is trying to emulate that as much as possible. Now, to do that, use JavaScript. So pure JavaScript, I don't think is that hard anymore. It used to be a lot more challenging to do pure JavaScript. But it still is challenging. So managing state, we mentioned that a little bit ago, is one of those things that's really hard. That all of those that you mentioned, React, Angular, and Vue, all manage state well. They just manage it differently across them. And what I mean by state is you click a button, that is a state change. The button has been clicked. Perhaps it's now loading, something along those lines, right? So when you want to manage state, you have to use JavaScript. There's just really no other way to do it. Otherwise, the browser is going to completely reload, right? So if you want to avoid the browser reloading, you want to feel a little bit more native, you have to use some sort of JavaScript library or just pure JavaScript itself. Sooner or later, we'll see something that's not JavaScript on web browsers. But the reason it's JavaScript is because the vast majority of web browsers support JavaScript natively. You don't need anything else. It doesn't support Python in the browser. It doesn't support Ruby. It doesn't support a lot of different things. It supports JavaScript itself to actually make state changes. So you guys are watching this video right now, whether it's YouTube or wherever. And if you click that like button, which you should, that is going to happen asynchronously, right? The page doesn't reload. You don't have to restart the video. All of that is a state change. And Angular, React, and Vue can all handle those things really, really well. They just do it drastically differently. So when it comes to like which one you should pick, well, originally I was a huge Angular fan. I have a course. I have several courses on Angular. I called it Jangular. I thought it was really cool. I thought it was really clever. And the problem with Angular, though, in my opinion, is it's a lot like Django in the sense that it's a full-on framework. It's a front-end framework completely. Whereas Vue and React are libraries. They're a lot smaller, so you can use them sparingly. You don't necessarily need to take over your entire front end. Angular may have changed since, but In the past, that's how it was. You basically make an Angular application, and it takes over your entire front end. And I know there's JavaScript developers out there that are like, no, you don't have to do that. That's true. You don't have to do that. You can do whatever you want, but that's what it's made for. It's made to take over the entire front end. Where React and Vue are about improving the user interface. So that like button, you can use Django and React or Django and Vue just to make the like button, and that's it. Nothing else on your site has to be Vue or React, but just that like button, that single thing. It will render the like button. It will actually send a call to the back end. It will understand when the back end is done. It will do all of those cool things really, really well, or at least it can if you do it correctly. And so that's like one of the things that really attracted me to React and Vue. More specifically, React. I've been using React a lot longer, so I'm much more of a fan of React myself. But the fact that you can change the state and manage the state in such a clean way is like the reason that you use React. jQuery, which is one of the older JavaScript libraries, does this too, and it still does it well. It just doesn't do it in as intuitive of a way as React. jQuery was made to respond to this need for better user interfaces 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I don't remember when jQuery came out. But it still works. It still works really, really good. So if you're not ready to take on something like React or Angular or Vue, jQuery is still a viable option, even though it's a dying one. Hopefully that answers your question. I kind of went on a little bit of a rant there.
Yeah, you hit that perfectly. I love your answer because that's like anytime you mention JavaScript to newer Django developers or Python and Django developers, they're usually not big fans of it. And I personally, when people ask me if they need to learn JavaScript, in that stream that we had, I always say yes. Like, you want to learn Django first, but what you mentioned as far as state, that's a topic. Well, I guess I'll just go without Justin. Where do you run?
See you, Justin.
All right. Well, I'll just continue. So Justin mentioned state. So a lot of Django people that come from, or people with a background of Python and Django usually don't deal with that. I'll add Justin to the stream. So essentially those little things like that like button, changing up the user interface can't be done without a browser reload. So that's why I always say JavaScript is mandatory when it comes to actually, really progressing. Like in theory, you could just be like a backend developer building out databases, APIs. But yeah, I think that's a good example. And I'm personally a big fan of React. I haven't used Vue, which I really want to because I hear great things about it. It seems seems like a lighter weight framework, even lighter than React from what I've heard. But I've never really went into Angular. Like I tried that. And it is a lot like Django, where it has a lot more of a learning curve.
Yeah, my friend uses Angular, and I watched him code for a while, and I was like, it looks very, very different. The question that I was going to ask Justin was, do you think that you should use React in every Django project? Like, is that what you would do? And, like, if you have to use JavaScript, why wouldn't you just use React?
Yeah, so I would say no. Trying to think of an example,
Sorry, go ahead.
So I put up my course website, right? Like I put my course on my own platform. Justin is back. So originally I had to get this out. Like I developed a course. I wrote it up in a Google Doc file, like all in, these Word docs. And I wanted to get the course out quick. And React takes a little bit more to configure. Like you really have to, at least from what I've seen or how I've experienced is you have to really plan the architecture a little bit more than you would in just a simple Django application. So I got that site up and I can really think as I'm coding because I don't really do that much prep work because half the time I don't even know what my application is going to consist of. So I just built it out. I used just JavaScript because right as I'm coding it, I think, okay, now I need to make this call. So I just think as I go and I make that request and add these features. So once I had that built out, then I moved to React because I realized that it would be much faster not to have to refresh the page every single time. So in simpler applications like my personal portfolio site, trying to think of another example. Justin, what's an example you can think of where you might really not need React, like where React might be an overkill or a framework like that?
Well, I think you should know JavaScript first.
Mm-hmm.
So jQuery is a lot, well, let's say just pure JavaScript and going with that to understand how the actual JavaScript works. But honestly, I think you can use React in pretty much even the smallest projects. So somebody mentioned something about a like button, like is React overkill for a like button? I actually don't think so, because the actual basic React app itself, if you use Parcel and React, Parcel.js actually bundles your React application. If you actually use those things together, you can have one JavaScript file with React in it that actually handles the button state, and it will do it much better than trying to actually engineer yourself this pure JavaScript thing. And so, like you said, your portfolio site, Dennis, you have, like, if you still do this, I'm not sure if you do or not, but you have a way to change the color or the theme of the site, and you can do it really easily. That's a really simple, easy thing that you can do using React that would take a little bit more effort to use JavaScript, because you're going to have to manipulate a bunch of different things on that page to make it work on JavaScript. Although, if you know JavaScript, it's also really easy.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's been my experience. Like, because I did that, right? I implemented this this theme switcher, and if I implemented this with React, it means that I would have to rebuild my blog, the actual blog on it, all the pages now in React. So I'll just show you the site here. So implementing this JavaScript took me a second. Like, all I had to do was change the style sheet that I'm loading into the page, and it adjusts it. So I feel like React might, I'm not saying that I shouldn't use React for it, but I feel like it would take a little bit longer to do that. And for what I was trying to accomplish, React was a little bit too much. That's how I feel about it. I don't know. I don't know if I'm right on that, but yeah.
No, I mean, that's the thing about these tools in general. If you can do it faster in a tool that you're really comfortable with, you should probably use that tool and look at optimizations later. I can do what you just showed me in React. I could do that, and I would use React because I think it's much cleaner. And also, if I want to take over more parts of my site, I would use React myself. But that's just me, because I'm now really, really comfortable with React. I can build a lot of things with it really quickly. I am really comfortable with JavaScript, but I just really like how quickly I can build these small little user interface things and just keep adding onto it with very little overhead from React. It's also incredibly efficient too. So to answer Mitch's question, I guess, Mitch, you asked, when should you use one over the other? Like, is there any time?
When should you use React?
Yeah, when should you use it? So it sounds like Justin's saying, since he's comfortable with it, use it all the time. So my answer to that would be, I think in any application where you're dealing with more than just displaying some basic information, like in my portfolio site, you really don't do anything. You just see my personal page here and then see a couple of blogs. Like, there's not really much interaction, but I feel like anytime you're building out something where a user is going to log in, they're going to deal with something state changing, which is that those UI components changing, it's going to be a lot easier. Like, I try to work with JavaScript components, and there was so much more to do than it was. JavaScript components, things like, trying to figure out how to explain this, like building out, let's say in React, everything's built in components. You kind of get that concept, right?
No, I know nothing about React.
Okay, so in a page, you have, like, let's say your home page, and your page is not a single page. It's built up of like little mini components that you import and then add into the page. So if I go to my website here, like this right here would be its own component, this little about section. And then this would be a component, and then that would probably be nested inside of a larger component. And your website is pretty much layered in with all these components. Now, you can build those in vanilla JavaScript, but there's a lot more work that you have to put into that. So that's where I'm thinking, if you're starting to interact with websites and you really started to change your state, like in your case, somebody types in a message, right, in your website, then you're loading in like a new component, you're updating certain things there. So that would be that'd be my answer there.
So these components, they have the ability to talk to the backend?
Yeah. So what you're doing is you build out like this one global state, because React is a single page application. So you keep your state in your application, and every time you're making an API call, you're just updating like this data store. Well, it's actually called, like, I use Redux sometimes. So
and you can have there's one data store, or you can have any number of data stores.
You could. So
you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything.
Okay.
I purposely mouthed it so Dennis can talk, but keep going.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I usually put everything into that one store, and it's just a JSON. It's pretty much a massive JSON object that just kind of has all this nested data, and you can update and then pull data from that. So yeah, that's
interesting. That sounds.
Mitch, I like to think of components. This is on all of those JavaScript libraries as like an HTML tag, right? So you're familiar with div tags, obviously, right?
Yes.
What would you do if you could build your own div tag? What does that look like, right? you can call your component Mitch's tag. So think div tag, but now it's not div, it's Mitch.
Gotcha.
With all of those, you basically build one of those, and then how does it actually render? Right? That's the question. So you build a function to make that render the way you want it to. So you actually write HTML inside of JavaScript, and you write the HTML on how that specific component renders. Mm-hmm. So in the case of Mitch's component or Mitch's HTML tag, that would render whatever you want in there. And inside of that function, so it's just a simple JavaScript function. Let's call it just like a Python function, or you could use classes, just like Python classes. It's not a whole lot different as far as how they function. But what they do is they return some sort of render that is very similar to Django snippets. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah.
Using just snippets, you include a tag that's including a snippet. It renders out that snippet. In that snippet, you can call other things that actually make the state change in that.
So the big thing here is that it maintains state, though. Like it's like a little compartment, the little component that can render its own whatever you've coded into it, and it will adjust based on it the state changes.
Yeah, it's just a little thing for user interface, or it could be really big. Angular is the case where it's really big. It manages all of it. React and Vue are the little ones. They can do just really, really small things.
Sounds cool. Sounds like it's worth knowing. Sounds like,
yeah. Good comparison, by the way, with the include tag. I should have used that because in Django, in theory, you can build out an HTML template and then include that. And that's kind of what components are. So your page is made up of like these little components or include tags. Yeah.
I got it now. I see.
You see why Mitch is a better teacher than I am, or not Mitch, but Justin. So you guys,
not Mitch.
No, not me.
Yeah. Mitch, you're an okay teacher.
Don't watch my stuff. It's not worth watching. Don't bother.
Oh, I disagree with you, Mitch. You were fishing for a compliment there, weren't you? No, what's cool about Django is these hidden layers of things that you can add to it that aren't necessarily talked about all the time, where you could make one view in Django, and have a bunch of include snippets that changed based off of the route. And it would be ridiculous. You probably wouldn't do this, but you could literally do the same sort of thing where it's like almost like a single page application. But the way that the Django template's being rendered, it actually renders different components and all that stuff, or that actually have their own views that do lookups and all that stuff too to your backend. So it would be a huge mess, but it is definitely something you could do, which is pretty cool. I mean, this is what I love about programming. There's like all of these hidden layers.
Sockets is another thing you could use.
Yeah.
Like what I learned.
WebSockets.
Yeah, WebSockets. WebSockets, yeah. But I mean, you're still using JavaScript there. But yeah, like just that asynchronous communication with your backend sockets will get the job done. But like I think about some of the code I wrote to make that chat website, and some of the JavaScript, there's a lot of JavaScript just because there's so much happening in a chat, and it's just back and forth communication with the socket. JavaScript function does a thing.
This is a good example of using React is WebSockets. So when you are connected to a WebSocket and that state changes, as in the WebSocket disconnects, a single React function with a React component library for WebSockets can monitor that so that your state variables, all the different state objects you have, it would be seriously just like one function that would be able to capture all of these different things. It's really, really cool. I actually did do a tutorial on it somewhat recently. I'll have to tell you about it. It's on my website. But basically the WebSocket persistent connection and all that, it can be a lot of JavaScript boilerplate. Stumbling over my words. I feel like Steve Carell and Bruce Almighty. There could be a lot of JavaScript boilerplate that you'll need to write, but with React, it's like maybe a page, maybe two. It's really, really clean and simple, Mitch. I really think you will like it a lot for your chat application. And I think a lot of your students, if you're going to be building on top of it, you can take that original JavaScript and modify it into using React and functional components.
That sounds like a good thing to do. Yeah.
So I just scrolled to the chat because we're going to get into that, or we're going to get to that in a second. And right away, I'm seeing F JavaScript. People hate it right away. That's funny.
It's not that bad. I don't think it's that bad.
I think it's just because somebody who's starting Django usually just learned Python, and then it's just like this whole nother thing that they have to learn. So it's just, they just don't want to do it anyways. So Justin, I think I want to keep going to you because you go more into the documentation, which I want to talk about because the Django documentation is awesome. I always refer people to that. People try to stay away from that, but there's great stuff there. What do you think about NoSQL and Django? So I use Postgres. I see MySQL a lot. What do you think about NoSQL databases?
So Django is built for a relational database, which is what SQL databases are. Non-relational databases like MongoDB, it just means that they don't have a predefined format, essentially, right? It's a bunch of, think of it in terms of a bunch of JavaScript, or excuse me, a bunch of JSON files that all sort of work together versus an Excel spreadsheet, right? So Excel spreadsheet is how Django is built. It's built for SQL. It's built for that relational thing. And it has a very structured way of functioning. So that's how they made it. They made it that way on purpose because SQL has been a proven database over and over again. So whether it's MySQL or Postgres or many of the other SQL backends. So you can use NoSQL for Django, though, using something called Django. Django is Django without an A in the middle. It's an O, much like Mongo. So it's Django and MongoDB together, Django. I have at least a blog post on this. I can't remember if I made a video or not, but definitely have a blog post on how to integrate them. It's actually not that hard to do.
I think I followed that actually.
Oh, you did? Yeah.
Yeah. So.
There's like, I don't really see the benefit, honestly. Like maybe somebody can convince me otherwise. But until Django adopts that as an option of one of their standard databases, I don't see a real need to use it. Perhaps it's a cost thing because MongoDB, I've heard, or NoSQL databases, I've heard can be less expensive to run. But I also don't know if that's true. So that's something that I would have to look up. But even with the cost thing, it's like they're open source technologies, all of it. So you can really tweak how your costs are depending on where you end up hosting things. So I'm not convinced it's a great solution is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I see the appeal to NoSQL, but I don't see, at least until they like really build it in more and actually prep Django for that, have more documentation, I wouldn't make that switch. Like I just did, I'm building a course together with Brad Traversy. So he has this MERN-Stack course where he has this e-commerce course, and he did it with MongoDB and Node.js, Express, and all that. And we're using React on the front end. So he had it in NoSQL. So I had to actually interpret that. So I was going through his NoSQL database, and then I made that into a relational database. So that was kind of interesting to see that comparison because I actually thought about it. I'm like, should I use Django for this? Should I actually try to make this? And then I realized it would completely throw off my students. It's not really practical. Not many situations would actually use it. Like relational databases are more, they're not a thing of the past. They are, or NoSQL is newer, but relational databases are not going anywhere soon. So yeah, I kind of had to make that decision and kept it as a relational.
Where you could use it is using FastAPI or Flask. Those are really valid options to use that because they're not opinionated about what the database should be. Django is, right? So that's a good place to use it. I think there are a lot of use cases for NoSQL, and you can use them together, right? So you don't actually have to use only the NoSQL database in a Django project. You can use NoSQL in conjunction with your regular database. You can use multiple databases in a Django project is what I'm saying. So maybe there's a potential for that. Maybe that's something that you need to be able to store other kinds of JavaScript on the fly, or JSON on the fly, rather, not JavaScript. That is possible, but I would say overall, you're going to be using NoSQL on other kinds of frameworks than Django. And the other thing is, something we didn't talk about was GraphQL, and how I just wanted to circle back to that because we didn't get to it. But GraphQL feels a lot like, to me, NoSQL, in the sense that GraphQL, you can make a request to an endpoint, and on your request, you structure what you're looking for, versus REST APIs already have a structure. They are already there and ready. So a REST API feels a lot more like SQL, whereas GraphQL feels like you're doing a SQL command on your own from the client side, right? So it's kind of giving you a lot more flexibility when you're doing a request to any sort of backend. And so then the backend's question is who's doing the request there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. When I started using GraphQL, when I looked into it, it was like you're making the SQL, the request from the front end. That was really weird because you're structuring your data, which completely threw me off because I understood that you have your API, it's structured the way you set it up, and then you pull that. So that was definitely an interesting concept.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a protocol. I mean, that's what I was confused about early on. It's literally just a different protocol, so you can implement it pretty easily in Django. You can implement it pretty easily in Flask and FastAPI. But yeah, like inside of GraphQL is when you're doing, hey, I want 10 posts from Mitch. You do that with your GraphQL call to a specific GraphQL endpoint, whereas the REST API would be you have to go to the posts endpoint and include Mitch's username, and then there you go. Now you have a REST API.
Yeah, it's less flexibility.
GraphQL has more flexibility.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Like the SQL has less flexibility. You have a specific endpoint which returns a specific thing. You can pass a few arguments, but the GraphQL, I haven't used it a lot, but I've looked at it, and you can make a more flexible request.
So, Mitch, I want to talk mobile apps. So I saw a couple of requests in the chats before we get to those. So you work with the APIs. You're putting together the mobile apps. You said you're going to switch to Flutter at some point. Is that correct? So you're using Kotlin.
Yeah, I'm gonna spend time on Flutter. I don't know if I'm gonna be like, okay, now I'm the Flutter guy, but I just mean like I'm going to spend. I'm gonna put a considerable amount of time into it. I spent like a month on it full time just to see like what it was all about and if it was worth knowing, and I thought it was awesome. And so I spent that month on it, and now I'm probably starting in March. Everything that I produce from March till, I don't know, a couple months probably will be all Flutter.
Are you going to redo any of your applications, maybe any tutorials?
Yeah.
Like in Flutter now, as far like a full remake maybe?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about doing, because some of the courses I have are they're like classics, and they're like they're good courses. It's just that like some of the stuff gets outdated. So I think I'll probably just rebuild some of those. Like right now I'm making the Compose one, and when I do the Flutter stuff, I'll probably rebuild some of my classics using Flutter. And then that also too, you get like a really good compare and contrast. Like the people who are currently native developers, they can very clearly see, okay, this is what Flutter is like to build the exact same thing, and you can see like what the pros and cons are.
Yeah, I like doing that comparison. That was fun for me in remaking Brad's course, was actually like seeing how he built out the API in Express and then doing all that in views and then the Django models. That was really fun to do.
When you guys were talking about the NoSQL, the NoSQL databases, what are the I don't actually know what are the pros and the cons versus SQL or NoSQL. To me, it seemed like the SQL databases were always better. Like generally the query functionality seems superior. I don't know. Changed my mind.
So I'm probably not the best person to answer this but from my experience, it seems like NoSQL has more flexibility because they're not so set in their ways. Like when you're doing SQL, you have your table and then it requires a certain amount of data, the columns and so on. NoSQL seems flexible in how it's actually taking that in. Like, Justin, I don't know how I'd explain the nested component, the nested portion of NoSQL. Like,
So Mitch, how familiar are you with JSON, JavaScript object notation? Pretty familiar?
Yeah, good.
Imagine if that was a database, like a big database, right? So if you add a new key value pair, do all of the other JSON files need that new key value pair? No, they don't. That's the same. That's what NoSQL is really good about, right? Whereas SQL, if you add a new column, all of the other values need that column now, even if they're empty, right? And this is why you do migrations in Django. You have to make sure that all of those other values have a value for any given column, even if no value is a value, right? that you still have to declare that. You have to be very specific about that with the SQL database. A NoSQL database, you don't need to do that. You can just add a value willy-nilly at any time, and it works. But it's also still very efficient for doing lookups because there's other features to it that you can add. You can add IDs into it and index values to actually look up things still very quickly. So it has a lot of the benefits of a SQL database with less of the downsides, right? But it's not necessarily as fast in looking up specific data, but it's really great at looking up and storing, varying sizes of data, like a JSON file.
So would an example of that, maybe if you had like a user table, right? And let's say somebody doesn't have a middle name. In theory, one of those users doesn't need that middle name attribute. Is that kind of an example, right? Maybe let's say like
that might be fine. So you say that, or some people have two last names or something, right?
Yeah.
You really only, for the vast majority of people, you only need two fields: the first name and last name. Let's say, right? And everybody else doesn't have the middle name and second last name. But if you do a request to this data and one person specifically has it, the client then has to just know that that's an optional thing that might be in there. The database doesn't have to store empty data for everybody else. So if you have millions of people that don't have a middle name or a double last name, you now have only 1 or 5 or 10 actual people that have those things. So the database doesn't have to have the structure for everybody else too.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So that's like that flexibility. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, Postgres has support for a JSON field. So you can actually store JSON in Postgres itself. So that does kind of solve that problem a little bit, but it's not quite the same.
What about so Firebase? They have a NoSQL database. They don't have a full text search option. Like if you search for you can't do an SQL query. Why? That just seems like such a big deal to me. Like to be able to easily search for something based on some keywords seems like why. That is that's the functionality you want. That you need that. Why doesn't it support that? That's I guess. Then to support that, what would it require?
Yeah, that's a good question. You're moving into the realm of what I don't know about NoSQL. I didn't use it enough to be able to answer that. Maybe it has something to do with using a better search technology like Elasticsearch or something like that.
Yeah, that's what they recommend in the docs. But I don't know.
So basically, then saying hey, pick the technology that's good at what it's good at versus using older technology that tries to be good at a lot of things. Like a good example of this would be Django and JavaScript, any kind of for JavaScript front end or any client for that matter. Django is never trying to be React or Vue, right? Ever. Because Django does what it's good at. And we also know that there's these other tools. So I'd imagine that's probably how they designed Firebase, knowing that, hey, there's these other tools that are better at doing specific things like what you're asking than this tool ever will be. That's my thought. But if you've used Firebase, you've been using NoSQL a lot.
Yeah.
You don't ever have to do migrations on Firebase, right?
It just inserts the data.
Yeah. There you go. There's
you just do whatever you want.
Database right there.
Yeah.
Django, you have to do the migrations. It's like one of the flaws of SQL. But even using Django and MongoDB, if I remember correctly, you still have to do the migrations, which is kind of funny. Oh. You just have to run it.
Django thing.
Dennis, did you see that? I mean, I definitely did a blog post on it, but it's been 6 months, so I don't remember specifically if the Django thing does it.
The Django one, yeah, I don't remember the details of that as far as the migrations, but I think I did read it. I'm pretty sure because I followed someone's tutorial on this, and I think it was more than 6 months ago, though. So maybe it wasn't you.
I mean, I definitely did it, but I'm just going blank because sometimes when I write tutorials, it's when I'm super into that thing, and then if I don't use it again,
just forget about it.
It just gets pushed out by some AI stuff like deep reinforcement learning. I got a new book. So
you're deep in the AI stuff these days.
I try to be, man. I try to be. I realized something. So I was talking to Kazi at Clever Programmer the other day.
Oh yeah,
and
I wanted to ask you about that too, but carry on. Sure,
yeah. And something that came up that I realized we are in different mind spaces of what we're trying to accomplish. Like he's building great content. He's just really focused on content. And I'm on the other side where I'm really focused on the technology. Like I'm obsessed with like learning more about the technology. So that is, I mean, I haven't posted a video on YouTube in a couple months. Like people are like, where are you? Did you stop doing stuff? It's like, no, I've been really deep in the technology. And so to me, that makes me a better teacher, but also like, I would rather know the technology really, really well than teaching things that, that I already know really well over and over and over again. You know what I mean? So that's something that I realized about myself talking to him, because he's in that other place of just making content a lot. And I've definitely been there, but it's like there's too many fascinating things to not study, and AI is definitely one of those things, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a hard balance as far as creating the content and then studying. Like you want to go into your own cave, study for a month, and then come out, but then you're not producing that. So that's where the talking head videos really help.
Yeah, this is
yeah. Well, it keeps consistency, yeah, and you're still providing value that way.
Yeah, this is like the content creator's dilemma. This is the thing that, like the thing at the top of my mind a lot of the time is exactly how you described it. Yes, I could very easily produce probably at least a video a day, probably more if I just do stuff that I know, and it would probably get a lot of volume, a lot of traffic because it's beginner stuff. It's like simple stuff, but it's like soul sucking. I don't enjoy it. It's not fun at all. Like I want to go and play with the new stuff, and like I'm interested in the engineering. YouTube is kind of like just a thing that I have to do, and then the engineering stuff is like the thing that I want to do. And so that's like, maintaining that balance.
Definitely.
Tough. And also the talking head stuff, I know exactly what you're talking about, because I started doing a vlog where I just talk about random stuff that I do, and that fills in the gaps for when I'm not like producing, when I'm like deep in the trenches. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. I've been watching yours.
Yeah.
So I think Chuck from Network Chuck, he does that great. Like he will just talk about one service for like 10 minutes, and he's not really, I mean, he does these little tutorials, and he does really good talking heads is what I'm kind of getting at. And that's pretty much all he does. He does tutorials, like I said, but there's so many of them that are just talking heads. And I really, really recommend to both of you guys to watch his stuff. Network Chuck.
Network Chuck. All right.
His logo actually looks a lot like this without glasses.
All right.
I think that's Network Chuck's logo right there.
It looks very similar. You're right.
Yeah. He's, I would love to talk to the guy someday, but he's got a really good way of presenting networking information. They're long
videos. Wait, is that minutes? No, that's hours. Wow.
Sometimes he does live streams that are really long.
Okay.
Yeah, but he does a lot of talking heads too. That he's just, I mean, he also draws on the screen using OBS and Adobe Photoshop, which I thought was kind of cool. So he does Photoshop as a green screen and does a chroma key on OBS, so he can literally draw on his screen like a sport announcement or whatever. I'm like, oh, what a cool and easy way to explain concepts. He's a cool guy, so it's definitely worth checking out. I don't know why I brought up Network. You just
earned him a subscriber.
Good.
Boom.
So you guys want to get into Q&A here? I know we got a lot of questions. I want to backtrack a little bit, and I do have one. Go ahead, Mitch.
I was just gonna say I should probably go in like 15 minutes. So
okay, cool. Just let me know when you need to jump out, and we'll just continue, and then I'll close it out. So I do want to just get into the Q&A for a second, just because I promised people that, and people do enjoy asking the questions live. So I do have a question right here. I can answer this one. I want to see if you guys have a different option, because I have some questions myself. But where to store a JSON web token with React or Redux? So my personal method of authentication when I'm using React is to use JSON web tokens. I know there's different types of tokens, but I love the simple JWT package, because that token doesn't need to be stored anywhere as far as a database. It makes things really easy. I always store that in local storage, and I know that that's not the best way, but I'm also not too concerned about the security on my sites. Like, I'm not protecting too much. What do you guys think, like, as far as where to store this? I can put it in the local storage, and then I just load that into the state whenever somebody logs in. Like there's the cookie headers, right? Or what's the term I'm looking for?
It's like the session parameters.
You don't want to do sessions, right? Because that's going to log a user out. Like a session only lasts while a user is there.
I don't use React or Redux, so I really don't know. What is this? Some kind of like an authentication token?
Yeah. So, for example, on your website, where are you storing that information? So, on that site that we pulled up, are you using a token? What are you doing for authentication?
It's just the Django authentication.
Oh wow, so you're using the default Django authentication?
Yeah, default Django.
Wow. Okay.
Which is secure. You don't need to use a JOT token for unless you're using JavaScript. I think local. This is the funniest thing about this. It's an ongoing debate with a lot of different developers. If you look on Twitter for JOT token, JWT token, you'll see people say, "Don't use JOT; it's insecure," and that's it. They don't say what to do. So yeah, local storage is fine. That's what I do. I think just getting in the habit of rotating your keys, as in your Django secret key. That's one of the things that a lot of Django developers, beginners, I should say, don't necessarily do, is change your actual Django secret. This does end sessions for people, but that's okay. They can log back in. They can re-authenticate. But doing that on a regular basis is a good idea just for security anyways. But the thing about JOT tokens, something I'm actually moving towards potentially is using the CSRF token, like the default token that Django has, in addition to using regular token-based authentication, not a JOT token. So both tokens together to actually do authentication with JavaScript on a Django project. That's actually something I'm moving more towards. So then your session for your React project is also your Django session. So you can actually use Django to end somebody's React token. Right now, or React session rather. Right now, I think that is rather challenging to do with a JOT token. Off the top of my head, I mean, there's definitely a way around it, but I think storing in a local storage is like the only viable option. But of course, using HTTPS is also another critical thing. If you're not using that, then your site's naturally insecure. Because I mean, that's really the end of the question is like, what's the most secure way to store authentication tokens? Local storage, I think is a fair option.
I've used cookies for this, and then Ben Awad actually had a good video on this, and he broke down the difference between using cookies, local storage, and then using your I don't know why I'm blanking out. It's like header cookies or something like that, to where the user can't see it in the browser. There's a way to hide that, and then he was basically pointing to that as being, in theory, the most secure method. So technically, a user can't see their own token.
Oh, interesting. I should check that out. He's been putting out some good content lately, huh?
Yeah, I like his stuff. So yeah, that was kind of my breakdown. But I like the fact that you're saying local storage, because there's people. I feel like the tech community hops on these trends, like PHP is dead, and then everyone will just hop on that, So the local storage topic kind of became that too. Well, what are you protecting? And what is the alternative? And local storage does seem like a viable source. I don't see why it's an issue. I think it was HTTP only cookies. Somebody just commented that. No, not this one. Or was it? But I'll still take the compliment.
So with these tokens, what do they say? They're saying like a token is just a token to like publish stuff or look at stuff on the website. They shouldn't store that in the local storage, the database. That's what they're saying.
So they're saying basically the fact that a user can, like, let's say I go to a website, right, and to authenticate my user information, I store that cookie in the local token. So in theory, somebody can take my computer, somehow find that token in my browser, and then go authenticate themselves. But that token also expires after a certain time. So you have refresh tokens. Right. Then it would take somebody to physically come to your computer and take that token, unless there's different ways you can probably access it. But now you're only having access to one user's information. So that's kind of what they're referring to, is that it's not secure, the fact that the user can see it. That answers your question.
Well, users have access to the CSRF middleware token as well, so you can see that. It's an ongoing debate. It's a challenging thing to make it totally secure, because it's impossible. And that's why I mentioned so many developers don't even use JOT tokens. They're insecure, and then they don't tell you what to do because nobody knows what to do. And so I think that's it's going to be an ongoing challenge. And that's why I'm considering doing two tokens essentially with my request headers. And then the other thing being that potentially doing two-factor authentication on your site will also increase how this whole thing, the security of your site as well. But that adds a layer of complexity that just a lot of single developers aren't necessarily going to be able to do, you know?
Yeah. So this is the answer that I was looking for right here. So HTTP only cookie seems like it makes that more hidden. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Thanks, Joseph. I'm gonna have to check that out too. That looks like maybe a viable option for this as well.
Yeah, that's what Ben Awad was referring to, was the HTTP only cookie. So somebody's having a question about Wagtail and CMS, and I don't have the answer for this. I was wondering if you guys know this, Justin, Mitch. Django
Sure.
CMS, I don't use it. Wagtail, and I don't use that either.
If you only need CMS features, like literally only CMS features, use WordPress. Like people are like, what? Why are you saying that? It's like heresy or something. Wagtail CMS, I think the developers put in great work and they made something that a lot of people seem to like. I don't love it. I think it diverts too much from standard Django, that it's like you might as well just use Django and build your own CMS, because the Django admin can function as a CMS for clients. That's not what it's for, but it can. And then on top of that, if you need a lot of flexibility and you're like trying to modify Wagtail, it's like you might as well just do it all in Django. Django is really good at building what you need. So I haven't been fully convinced that Wagtail is a good option for a CMS at all, because it's almost like, hey, here's a CMS built in Django. Well, until WordPress moves to Django, well, that's not going to happen. But WordPress is, to me, the CMS if you're just using a CMS, an open source one. There's like way too much support for it. And the other thing is PHP also still does have support, quite a bit actually. And once you know Python, or you know programming, you know HTML, you know CSS, modifying a WordPress site is not really that hard to do. But the thing is it's like hard to understand the difference when you're just trying to pick a CMS, right? So WordPress is the most mature. It has the most security updates all the time. Like, to me, it's like WordPress is the choice.
Thank you for that answer. That's good.
So you're saying if you're going to build a website that requires a CMS, you shouldn't even be using Django. You should just use WordPress.
Potentially, yeah. So if you're building a blog for your Django application, you can totally build it in Django, and that's a great tutorial. It's a great thing to do. That's what I do. But WordPress has an API. So you can actually build a WordPress CMS and just use the API from the WordPress CMS, where your customer or your client, the person that's actually paying you to do this, can literally use the WordPress features, and you would just use the API from that and pipe that into a Django project if you wanted to combine the two for some reason. But yeah, I would say really, if somebody's like, oh, I need a blog and I don't want to use one of the paid services, I just want an open source thing. Can I use this Django Wagtail thing? It's like, no, just use WordPress. Trust me, just use WordPress. It's really, really good.
It's going to be easier for you at the end of the day.
Easier, more secure, a lot easier to get another developer to make changes to it, and stuff like that. So
right.
Okay. Yeah, that was a perfect answer. Like I kind of get the overall concept, but Justin, this is why you're the guy that goes into tech and understands it and always gives the best explanation. So somebody was asking about React, or
I don't know about the best explanation, but an explanation nonetheless.
There you go. Somebody was asking about Bootstrap and React, and I think that was Joseph Branch. So I just wanted to answer that one. Can't find the question. So React has a UI library for React Bootstrap. So I'm actually currently using that right now. So you can use React and Bootstrap, and you can also still use the what's the term where you add in just a link, and you can still use Bootstrap classes. So it works just fine. Yeah, those work together.
Sounds like I got to learn React. It sounds like, yeah, it's well worth it.
I think so. Mitch, you can wait a little bit. I'm going to do a new try React series soon.
Oh, nice.
So just wait on that. And
what are we're talking February, March, or?
I don't have a timeline. I never have timelines. I can't give you a timeline.
But it's coming down the pipe at some point.
Yeah, you can bug me about it and in the future if you're like, hey, I'm ready to learn it, you know.
Okay.
But the coolest thing that Bootstrap has now is no jQuery. So jQuery is, as a Bootstrap 5 that just came out, jQuery is no longer required, which is amazing. So that means that you can just literally use the Bootstrap CSS and something like React Strap, or Vue has Bootstrap stuff, Angular has Bootstrap stuff, to use the functionality that Bootstrap has. So there's like drop-down features and modals and stuff like that. So they work really hand in hand really well. The unfortunate naming problem that Bootstrap has had for a long time is Bootstrap called itself the mobile-first front-end framework. It called itself a framework. It wasn't ever a framework. It was always a library. And now, since then, they've changed it. But for a really long time, so a lot of videos, a lot of tutorials will call Bootstrap a framework, where it's not. Even React's not a framework. React's a library as well. So a framework is Angular, where it's like you pretty much are implementing it. It already has an opinion about how you use it, and that's what you do. So hopefully that answers whose question. Whose was that? Joseph? Is that what you said?
What was I even talking about?
Joseph Branch was asking if you can use React with Bootstrap, and then I answered that one. Then you went into that explanation. That was good.
You still have the Wagtail stuff on.
Yeah, I'm
trying
to figure out how to close that out. Sorry about that. Once a message leaves, I don't know how to. Once it leaves, I don't know how to close that. So Danny Thompson is in the.
Just do a new one.
Oh yeah, let's find something. They just move so fast; it's hard to keep up here. Like the second I find one while you're answering it, then I'm trying to.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments here.
Dude, when I first started doing live streaming, I didn't do the slow thing, and I was only on YouTube. I wasn't using StreamYard like what we're using. But the comments would just crush. So I made a tool that interacted with the YouTube API just so I could pick and choose the comments that I wanted. Yeah.
What do you mean?
I wish you can save the comments for later, like because you see one and then we're in the middle of discussing something and then it goes away and then.
Maybe I need to redevelop this tool some more for us live streamers.
That'd be neat.
But basically, so Mitch, do you see the chat comments on StreamYard right now?
Yeah.
So it was almost identical to this, but I had the ability to control the state of it, so you could select a comment and keep it there, and
so it wouldn't like scroll away as more comments came in.
Yeah, exactly. But it was only the comments. So you had to use OBS Studio for it to embed that on the video because it wasn't actually doing the streaming. So StreamYard does all the streaming stuff. I never ever built that. I was just more the API specifically for the comments so I could pick and choose comments. And my thought was my customers on codingforentrepreneurs.com, I would also pipe it in there so that they could ask questions and their questions would be the ones that would be answered first. But it's a lot of development for something that only I am going to be using. So StreamYard is like the thing,
Yeah, StreamYard's good. I think it's good piece of software. Yeah,
it's really good. Danny Thompson's the one who showed me to it.
Yeah, I haven't. He's a moderator here, so he stopped some spam comments earlier. So thank you, Danny. And I'm trying to figure out how to implement slow mode. Do you guys know how to do that?
No,
I don't think there's a way to do it in StreamYard.
Okay, so I actually opened up YouTube, but.
I think you have to do it prior as well.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll deal with it. So somebody asked, what is the state of Django? So that's the title of this video. Django, as far as like the popularity, it's definitely the framework for Python. Like I know that's relative to what you're doing, but it's the number one framework, I think, by far with Python, then probably Flask after that. What do you guys think the future of it is? Maybe not going too far forward because that's pretty much impossible to predict, but I always like to say Django is awesome because Python is awesome. Like I use Django because of Python. So what's your thoughts on the future here? Where are we at?
It was like my first love for web development. Like that was the first thing that I used, and it really just was, it checked all the boxes. So I never really looked elsewhere, and I don't see that changing. I don't see, I don't see anything else out there that I look and I see and I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that. And Django can't do that. That hasn't happened yet. So I really don't know. I'm just going to keep on using it. They're updating it constantly. Like we were talking about Andrew Godwin earlier. That guy is like, he's Django MVP. I think he's really done a lot of work, and the Django community seems just awesome. Django REST framework community seems awesome. Everything just seems good. I don't see any reason why that would change or any reason why I would need to go learn anything else at this point.
I'll second that. I feel the same way. Django can't not do anything for me. Like it's done.
Yeah.
Publish everything.
Yeah.
Well, there are a few things. I have some thoughts. No
Well, of course,
surprising.
Justin.
So Django doesn't have a native worker process. You have to use Celery. You don't have to. I mean, I guess there's other ways to do it, but Celery is something that I would love to see Django have their own opinionated version of Celery inside of it. The Django REST framework should not be necessary anymore. It should be built into Django. They've done this before. South migrations was before migrations are into Django. So migrations are incredibly important for Django. South was brought in. I think the REST framework, the Django REST framework, is just as important to Django as many other packages. That should be in Django as well.
That's a good point.
Those are my, I mean, there's like good reasons to keep them separate for sure. And I don't know what those reasons are, but I would love to have those things built into Django from the get-go and take their opinionated outlook on using those tools or those features that you might need in a web application. But one of the coolest things is Django 3.2, the next LTS, comes out in a few months in April 1st-ish, I think. So that's super exciting. So that's going to take Django into 2024. So we know that we have at least a few years more of really solid Django to look forward to. I'm looking forward to the next LTS because then I can upgrade a lot of my older series itself. But
When was that Django? Is that you said March, or did I catch that wrong?
April 1st. April Fool's Day.
Okay.
Somewhere around April. Yeah. So you can look on, if you go to djangoproject.com/download, you will see
I'm there now.
The schedule for their releases. I get this question a lot that we haven't brought up. I think, Dennis, you and I have talked about this a lot. The thing about Django is it hasn't changed that much, right? So there are asynchronous features now, but the core of it is the same. So even Django 1.10 still works today. It's not recommended for a security feature, but for a learning feature, your older stuff, things that you've done in the past, they still work. So if you see a video from 2015 on Django, or like Syntax, I think has Harrison, he has like a video from, I want to say 2015, 2016, something like that. It's a great video. He still covers Django really, really well. So let's always remember that. I love talking about the new version coming out, but let's always remember the old version is still worth learning.
Yeah, I think I started learning Django a week before it upgraded to 2.0, I think. So it was like 2017, December, and I was following Bucky Roberts' tutorial, and I got to where we're making the URL paths, and you used to use the URL function, which you can still use, I believe. But yeah, that threw me off because I didn't understand that it just upgraded and I had the more recent version. But other than that, like that's probably the biggest thing I've seen. Are you seeing any big? Are they announcing any big changes that are coming in April? Like any specific things yet? Or they haven't posted that?
They have a changelog going. I don't think there's anything major other than security features. I don't remember if there's anything major. I probably should have looked prior to chatting with you today. But the last time I looked, there wasn't something that was a huge release. It was just an incremental release. Although there's probably a number of deprecations that are happening that are for things that you're just probably don't even use anyway. So
yeah, that's what it looks like in the Django documentation, which I can't stress enough, guys. Like I totally get the downside to people not wanting to use the documentation because you want to follow a tutorial. But that's when I felt like I really went from just like building something and trying to just put something together to really understanding this is when I added the documentation to that. So you still follow tutorials, but I can't stress Django documentation enough. Like it's the best documentation I've seen by far, I think.
Something I totally failed to mention that I did earlier, but the async support is going to be a lot more in 3.2 as Ujali, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, just mentioned. That's actually a really good point. But like the core of Django, the synchronous stuff, that's all going to pretty much be the same. So, there's going to be a lot more asynchronous things with Django, like we talked about at the very, very beginning of this. So
that was this one, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So yeah.
Yeah. I'm just, if you guys have any questions or see any questions in here, let me know. I'll just try to, or just go ahead and read them off. I'm trying to respond to.
I'm actually going to
Sure.
leave you guys. I'll leave you guys to handle the stream. I think you're you're plenty capable. So
I feel like we are, yeah.
yeah. So thanks
thank
for having
you,
me
Mitch.
on.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good to
Yeah,
see
later,
you.
Mitch.
Good to
Appreciate
and
you.
chat with you soon.
Have a good one. Talk to you later,
All
guys.
right. See you, man.
Later. All right.
So here's one that I wanted to mention: multi-tenancy with Django. So this happens from time to time where people want to use Django to manage like essentially multiple versions of Django, or to manage like subdomains and other databases with Django. There's definitely technically possible to do this. I'm just not sure if Django is the best choice to do so. Perhaps it is, but multi-tenancy is where you have like a bunch of different applications running and one kind of running that for you. So I think what would be better probably is actually, well, I don't know, maybe Django would be a good choice. I haven't done it enough to really give a good answer, obviously, but it's not a trivial task. I know that much. And so Django is not really built for doing multi-tenancy itself. There are other tools that are out there. I'm just not sure which ones you would end up using. But you can use Django to control, let's say, for instance, use Django and Ansible together. So using Ansible would actually do all of the tasks necessary to spin up a new virtual machine. That virtual machine could then have a new Django installed, and the main Django project could then control that virtual machine with that new Django project. And then you'd have DNS servers that would actually have to handle all of this stuff, thus allowing for multi-tenancy with Django itself. But it's just a kind of a complicated mess, and you'll have to know a lot more of network engineering to execute it well. Thus it's like a question I get a good amount, but it's not the easiest one to answer.
Yeah. Well, you're teaching me live here, so I'm actually learning. So Django for 2020, who do you think's got? Well, what are some projects that you're seeing out there? What are you coming out with? You said you're putting together a course. I'm putting together a full new course. It's kind of a remake from what I did last year in November. Nice. So I finished that up around January. I'm doing a full remake. And I think the latest one that I've seen that's really popular is probably your Twitter one, that 10-hour project. So that's a project, but it's still Django pretty much front to back there. And Corey Schaefer, I think, has a pretty solid one. Any other projects or courses you're seeing?
From other people, I don't know, because I'm not actively trying to learn Django, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not looking for the best YouTube channels that also teach Django. I'll say that I'm going to have a new Try Django series coming out soon. My last one was Try Django 2.2, so it's been a little bit of time since I've actually released a new Django series. But I mean, the main thing is picking something like a project that you're interested in and doing it as much as you want, and then maybe even finishing that project. But because there's a lot of different tutorials out there that can help fill in gaps. And I think YouTube is actually pretty good at recommending the things that you should learn from. Yeah. Syntax, like I said, Harrison, he has a lot of great videos in general for Python. He does a lot of Python programming things. So if you aren't subscribed to him, I would subscribe to him.
I feel like he's like you on steroids with the technicalities of things. Like he really goes into it.
He has a depth and a breadth of knowledge that not many programmers do. But on top, or I should say, not many YouTube content creator programmers do. He also teaches it really, really well. I really like how Harrison does things. So he might be a good channel to check out. People tell me Corey Schaefer all the time. I haven't checked out his stuff that much, and I haven't had a chance to talk to him yet. So I don't know, but I would imagine people seem to like it. So yeah, maybe he's worth mentioning.
It's simple.
So Real Python, their website, I think they have a great website. They have a lot of really good articles. Testdriven.io, a lot of great articles. Medium. So I actually read more articles than I watch videos at this point, because I don't need to watch an hour-long video to get something that could be summarized really well with me scanning through an article. so that's typically what I end up doing. So the other thing is, if you're on Medium and you pay for Medium and you start following a bunch of different Django like guides on there, you'll start to get a lot of other good ones. So that's what I see.
All right. So I'll pull up another. I don't fully get the question. I think the question is kind of like, what do you need to know basically for real world problems? I have an example of this one. I want to see if you have more than your course platform, but have you used it in the real world to solve a real problem? So in my case, I have that website that I built out for work and that ended up selling. So there's a YouTube video on that one. In that case, the real world problem was the fact that I built out like a data storing system for a laboratory. So Django worked very well for that. And at that point, I actually used React with it, but not in the first version. And I learned basically the basics, I would say, of CRUD. So all the create, update, and delete functionality. Once I had that, it was basically some Python calculations in the back end and user authentication. And I would say basically all your Django basics was enough to create that application. So I'm trying to answer that in a way of saying that once you kind of go through the documentation, like that core course, it's all about just applying it, but that should be enough, I think, to build out something like what I had. How about you, Justin? What's something that you've built maybe, or what would you recommend that everyone starts to focus on when they're starting?
Yeah. CRUD is a good one. So create, retrieve, update, delete, that concept, how to implement that in a actual page. Knowing HTML, at least the basics of HTML and CSS, like generally what they mean, how you can structure HTML. That's probably a good thing that you need to learn. But really, each problem is going to be different. You're going to have to solve a lot of different things for a specific problem, right? So let's say, so my Try Django 3.1 course, or the next Try Django course I'm going to release, is about solving the problem of managing meal planning. So when I say meal planning, I have 2 kids, I have a wife, she meal plans everything. And with the meal plan, we then also have to take all of that data and turn it into a grocery list to go buy stuff, right? It's a lot of manual work, which could be automated, especially from recipes and stuff like that. So the question is, how do you actually solve that problem? That's a very specific problem that I want to solve through code. And so that's going to have all of these different things that come into that. Number one is like, how do I actually extract recipes, for example? That's a clear problem. How do you actually extract recipes from like a picture without typing it in? How do you do that? I mean, once you answer those questions, then you'll start to think about what you need to do with the technology. And that's, I think you need to find the real world problem and then try and solve it with the technology versus the other way around. Yeah,
that's a good way. Exactly. So you're looking for the problem and then what you're going to need for that. So in your case, you probably want to access some kind of API maybe for recipes. So, okay, your minimum is I need JavaScript probably for that to make those requests to scrape this data, maybe not a web scraper, but whatever you need to solve that problem, and then think of how to build that and then just run into those roadblocks and solve them. Good example.
Totally.
Yeah. So there's this question right here, which is better for real-time chat, Ajax or Django channels. So Ajax is just going to be to make asynchronous requests. You can use it for that. It's not going to really solve your real-time chat problem because channels, you need those WebSockets to connect, right? Like Justin, you know more about this, but yeah, you would need channels in order to make that work. You can't just do that with Ajax unless you're maybe making a request like every 10 seconds, which would kind of kill your API there. Like you'd be overloading that.
Yeah. Actually, Code with Tomi, I think he has his own tutorials. Of those things. I missed a few. I saw in the comments. Just Django, Matt over there, he's great. I really like Matt. I think he has a lot of good stuff. So definitely check that out. PyPlane was another one. He comes on my stream sometimes. He's a cool guy. So check those out. Those are ones that I should have mentioned earlier that weren't top of mind. But the question is, real-time chat needs a persistent connection. And the only way you can have a persistent connection is using WebSockets. So WebSockets quite literally connect your client to your backend persistently. So there's two-way communication. Ajax, on the other hand, is one-way communication, even though it's happening asynchronously, and it's only happening from the front end. That means that every time you do an Ajax call, it needs to reconnect literally every time. Whereas a WebSocket is connected all the time. So you can do that really a lot faster. So certainly Django channels is by far the answer to this one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that was a cool concept. When I learned that, that kind of blew my mind because I didn't understand the idea of a two-way connection. So for those of you guys that don't know what that means, like you load up your browser and then to get data out of your database, it makes a request and then it pulls that back. But real-time chat, when your website loads up, there's a two-way connection. So when the database is updated, it can update the front end, which is really cool, like understanding that connection process. And I think I actually learned that from Mitch, I think. I don't remember what channel. That was like a couple of years ago. He had a video on that. Maybe it was just Django.
I've done Django channels quite a bit in the past as well.
Yeah, maybe
wherever you learned it, it's a great topic. WebSockets, the best analogy I have for this, if it's not fully making sense, WebSockets and sockets are like a phone call that somebody else answers. You're on the call and it stays open, right? Whereas Ajax is a little bit more like sending mail through the mailbox, right? Or let's say like you have FedEx come to your actual place, pick it up and take it where it needs to go, and then bring you back a response and stuff like that. So the phone call is persistent. It's two-way communication. Ajax, on the other hand, is not. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think you did. That was
solid. Cool.
All right, Justin, how are you on time? I don't want to hold you too long here, and I probably try to keep these around 2 hours. I don't want to go over that.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm here to hang out and chat. I haven't been on a YouTube video in a little while, so I figured I would chat. And I'm sure we have a lot of shared friends and followers.
Yeah.
And stuff like that, so might as well talk to everybody right now. Somebody mentioned Harrison is Syntax, I guess. Yes, Syntax. The guy's name is Harrison. I can't remember what his last name is. I think it's Barnes, but maybe I've got that incorrect. But Harrison on Syntax.
Yeah. And I just wanted to thank Danny Thompson again. He's always in my streams for like however long they last, and he's moderating because I made him an admin, or not an admin, but a moderator in the chat section. So I want to give him a shout out. So go check out his channel, by the way. Danny has some good content. So here he is regulating the channel. He's a law enforcement here.
Love it. The guy doesn't sleep.
He's crazy.
How do you even code, Danny? I don't even get it, because you're everywhere, man. I love it.
Let's see.
So somebody just mentioned what I was just saying. You've worked 6+ months on multi-tenancy with Django. It's capable of doing it, but it's not the most effective way. Yeah, that's kind of what my thoughts were.
Yeah.
Why are people negative towards Python? I think people get in camps, and that's what it is. Like, people are in this like JavaScript camp, and they're like, oh, only JavaScript for everything. And JavaScript can do pretty much everything Python can do and a little bit more. But the best tool is the one that you know, and you know it well, so you can get your projects done. So I think there's always going to be backlash against what the new popular thing is. And JavaScript has been around for a long time, so it's had fans for a long time. It's evolved over the years. So I think you've got some diehard JavaScript people. But that's probably not the people that are most vocal. I think a lot of the people that are PHP people, that they've been around even longer. And there's a lot of people that are saying PHP is dead. You should use Python or JavaScript. So PHP is not dead. It's very much alive. It still has a very vibrant community. But I think we get in these camps, right? We join these teams and we're like, oh, Python all the way, don't do anything else, or JavaScript all the way. And I think that's why there's like a lot of backlash to it. And the really hardcore programmers, the ones that are working at like C level or even lower, the low level languages, they look at these like something like Python, and they're like, oh, it's just an abstraction. It's not real programming, because it's just an abstraction, which some argue that that's the case. But this is how you get these camps even more divided, is that like some of these leaders saying that, oh, it's just an abstraction, you know? So
yeah, I think you answered both of those. Like, I think it's that where you mentioned that C level to Python, and then Python guys are saying that about WordPress developers. So it's a little bit of that to probably validate yourself, and then also human tendencies to want to be in some kind of camp and group. We want to belong somewhere, so we create these little clubs.
Yeah, totally. I know. It's funny. I don't have any like swag for Python or Django or
Yeah,
like any like hats or you know what I mean, like or coffee mugs. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Like I don't even have stickers. Like some people put stickers everywhere and all that. It's kind of funny.
I tend to be the opposite from like anything trendy. I hate that club mentality. Anytime I see something on Twitter that's trendy that way, I just tend to stay away from it because it's usually a fad and just doesn't really resonate with me.
Yeah. So you're closing in on 100,000 subs, dude. Congratulations.
Yeah. That's it's been kind of tough to watch because I had this momentum and then I'm working on this course and that just took away about 4 months of the last year. And I'm trying to get this next course that I have out in like the next week here with Brad. And that's not going on YouTube, the unfortunate part about that. So it's going to be on Udemy and then the next one is on YouTube. So there's still going to be downtime.
Yeah. Well, I think the important thing is when you show up in a big way. And the other thing is like if our subscribers or whatever, I mean, actually, what's his name from the New Boston? Is it Bucky, right?
Yeah, Bucky Roberts.
He was gone for years.
Yeah.
Right? And he still has like, 2 million subs or something? I don't know.
Yeah. It's less about the subs for me. Like that really, like once I got to a certain point, really stopped caring because I wanted to provide the value. I just feel like I'm letting certain people down. And then when I'm not replying to messages, which I tried, it was kind of funny. There was a time where I spent like a whole week just replying to messages and that's all I did. And then I would still open up my inbox and get the, you didn't reply, F you or whatever. Like some people would actually get offended that you didn't reply. It's like, I just spent a week doing this. So that's always hard because I want to get to those, but I'm in my own, little nest here trying to figure things out.
Yeah. So, somebody said something about a fan fiction between us. What's the fan fiction between us? Do you know?
I'm not sure. No.
It's like Javerti. Tell us what's the fan fiction between us. Yeah. So here's a good question. The overwhelmingness of all of the different technologies out there. To me, the technology part is not what's overwhelming. It's the opportunity that's overwhelming. There is so much opportunity out there that it's like you got to pick one and go for it and really work hard on that. I think we all have that opportunity, but also to remember if you stick with something long enough, you'll get good at it. Hopefully, if you're constantly learning, constantly practicing, constantly getting better, to the point where the opportunity is what you're looking at now, and no longer just the technology. That's a little bit. It's like impossible to know all of the technology. But if you start building projects that start doing well, then it's not going to matter because then you can start working with other people that do know all of these other technologies that fill in the gaps that you don't have yourself. So
yeah.
For me, I just want to learn as much technology as I can. And I have a pretty clear path on what I want to accomplish learning wise myself. So I think trying a bunch of things will help you clarify what that path will be, because if you hate something, you shouldn't do it. But if you really are starting to like some sort of programming language and then somebody tells you about something else, you're like, no, I'm going to stick with this for a while. That's good. That's how you learn and that's how you get better at stuff,
Yeah. So this one is kind of I'll miss the question here. So what do I need to learn for an entry-level Django job? We kind of answered this one. This is kind of like the basics of what do I need for real world applications, like get through that basic functionality, find out what that job would require or what certain companies that you like are building and see if you can accomplish what they're doing. I just wanted to pull that one up there.
You have a couple videos on that too, right? Like what a beginner needs to know.
Yeah. So I had one that actually went way bigger than I thought it would. So that was how much Python do I need to know before Django? And we discussed this in our last stream. And I really like that one because I had somebody on Twitter recently say, hey, I bought the book, Automate the Boring Stuff with Python because you recommended it. So they were going through that book and they're like on chapter, I think 9 or something like that, where they're creating like a password, not a serializer, but a hasher. And they messaged me saying, well, they're just kind of losing interest in the book. And do they really need to finish it before moving on to Django? And I really wanted to address that one right away. And I felt like that video did. But basically I was saying that once you learn the basics of Python, you should move on. And I really felt bad knowing that somebody was stuck in trying to figure out everything about Python when you don't. There's so many things in Python you will never use in Django. And that book addresses some of those, like web scraping. I haven't used a web scraper with Django. You don't have to learn that in order to start with Django. So yeah, I basically summarized it with the basics. Like if you know functions, variables, loops, classes, move on and then go back into Python when you run into the issues, because a lot of the issues that I see Django developers have are really Python issues. They're just a simple debugging error. Maybe they're just not experienced and they put in a capital H somewhere and then a lowercase h in another, or a letter in a different area. So people always kind of get mixed up there in what they need to learn and then the debugging process.
The funny thing is, learning Python never stops.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So like I have a Python for finance book in here, math for programmers. I don't know how much I'm going to get out of these Python for data analysis. But it just, you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
It literally never stops. So if you're thinking that you're going to master everything and know everything, it's just probably not going to happen. But I think your advice is right.
Yeah. So this is building games with Python. I did this one a while ago, but I thought I had that book. I think I have it on another bookshelf. But yeah, that's the whole game. That's the whole perfection is the enemy of progress. Like you're trying to perfect it, you're not going to move. Get to a point where you understand it, and then if you find out, let's say you start coding after just learning a variable in a for loop, and then you run into an issue because you don't understand what a class is, go back into Python and then figure that out. You can go back and forth. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be linear. And I've done that with books. Go ahead.
The funny thing is you could go on Stack Overflow and search for Django or Python or whatever and go to the top 100 questions on Stack Overflow. If you can answer those, you're probably maybe the top 200, but let's just say top 100. You could probably then start actually building real projects. Yeah. And if you can't answer them, just read the question and learn it,
Go look it up. Yep.
So Khalid asks, why do I like Joe Rogan? How do you know that I like Joe Rogan? Have you been listening to me?
You mentioned it before, I think in our last stream, actually.
Sure. I definitely have. I think Joe has a very interesting way to interview people, and he is mostly objective in a lot of things when he is interviewing. But at the same time, he's also not afraid of sharing his opinion if he doesn't agree with the person and stuff like that. I think I admire, my perception has changed of him because of how much he works on his content. Like he interviews people for 3 hours at a time. He goes to the next thing. He does that twice a day. Like it's like the stamina to do that is amazing. But at the same time, like it's very clear that he's doing this to educate himself, to just get smarter. Because he's getting these most brilliant people on there and just chatting with them for hours on end. I don't know, that's really, really cool. And yeah. I think on the other hand, I mean, there's things that like are kind of like, really, he likes that, or he did that, or he said that, but don't we all do that all the time? Joe is just very publicly doing that. Like if I had a camera and a video or a video and a mic on me with every conversation I've ever had with friends of mine, people would be like, why do I listen to this guy? And I feel like Joe gets that a lot, but I think the vast majority of times he's a really good source for learning and perspective. So.
Yeah, I agree with you with you there. He's really good at getting people to feel comfortable and open up. And I love that he brings on controversial people, because especially in today's world where like that's almost not allowed. That bothers me so much. Like I am so okay with going into, I know this is off the topic of Django, but I'm so okay with going into somebody completely opposite of me, because if you think something different than I do in my belief system, there's got to be a reason to it. And I don't, even if the topic is completely controversial and I disagree with it, I want to know why you believe that way. And I feel like he is really good at doing that. And then at the same time, he'll still state his point, but he'll bring on those kind of people. And once you get to know the reason behind somebody, you'll find that the people that you disagree with most, whether that's politically or religious beliefs, you'll find that you're way more similar than you think, but you just come to conclusions differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And something that's interesting about all that is Joe is a fighter. Like he literally could fight any one of his guests and probably knock them out. Right. But he doesn't, he's not even close to even doing that ever. I don't think I've seen him get a little heated, but I've never seen him get to the point where he's like ready to throw blows, which is interesting because he is talking to all these people that are just like out there and have all these different perspectives, and he doesn't agree with most of the time. And I mean, I think if we had more people that are willing to sit down and have long conversations about all sorts of things, very publicly too, perhaps we would have less discourse, at least in the US. I mean, you know, like what happened yesterday, like, whoa, like that's gnarly, you know?
But the second you can't have that conversation is when things go bad. That's very true. You need to feel free enough to discuss it, and not in a combative way, not to win the conversation, but just to hear it out. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to talk to somebody who does not share your beliefs at all. And of course, this is not like about programming, because programming, it's like hard to be controversial with programming. I feel like maybe not, but like with political things, with economic things, with the government, like what things should happen, that's a hot button issue for everybody around the world. And I think it'd be better to be able to actually have conversations about it, sharing your beliefs, and not ready to go to war with the person next to you. But you know, that's just doesn't seem to be everyone's nature. Yeah. Or human nature, I should say.
Well, Justin, we're off the topic of Django, so I guess we can probably close it out here. We're at the 2-hour mark. A really fun conversation. We can go on all day with this. Probably should do that in a stream more related to just chatting. But that was fun having Mitch here. I didn't realize how funny Mitch was. Like, I watched his videos and he's kind of this like serious guy, and then he commented on one of my Twitter posts and he said something hilarious, which I won't even say here, but I realized he has more of a personality, but he keeps a straight face with it.
Yeah, he's definitely a silly guy. I think it's something about when you are recording technical content. I mean, I don't know if you feel this way, but when you're recording technical content, it's like, okay, now I'm in serious mode. Where like I'm not nearly as serious as I am when I'm recording. Like I get like in the zone, if you will, which is something I like about these conversations. Is like you can kind of let that go a little bit, but even that, it's like, if we were in a studio, like we talked about last time, if we were in a studio, then, you know, maybe we would actually have those fun conversations the whole time, and we'd be laughing and just having a good time, and not because like I'm still in my studio and we're not with each other, you know, like,
and you still have the sound issue too. So you can't really have that normal conversation. Like you have to have the pause because the audio will override it, and then that kind of throws things off.
Totally, the delay and all that.
Yep.
But at some point, one of us is going to have an actual sit-down studio and just like chat for hours and talk about all things technology and everything else. And I think to me, the reason we started drifting from Django is like being too focused on one thing is like probably not great, right? We need other areas of our life that we like to, that we enjoy. And that to me brings back to Django. It makes your work better when you're willing and able to do things that aren't just coding. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Speaking of that, I'll change that to a long coding session topic. When I code, so right now I'm recording a series for that course that I'm making for Brad, and I'm filming for about 10, 12 hours a day. But I take walks like consistently, and I allow myself to take those little tiny breaks even after my walk to like get on YouTube and just watch something completely unrelated and do that for like 15 minutes and then go back into it. Like that's really important, just to not have your brain locked into it too. Like it's not really good.
Totally.
For I think to stay that focusing on one thing.
Yeah. So, the last thing I will actually mention something about Django. Somebody keeps asking this about the best platforms to host Django. This maybe this is not the best way to wrap it up. I'll send it back to you in a second. But Heroku is probably the easiest one to get going, but not necessarily the least expensive. The next probably least expensive would be something like Linode, because you can Linode or DigitalOcean. Least expensive dollars wise, but time wise is going to take more time to actually set those things up. In my opinion, there are other services out there that have been around, like A2 hosting. I think it has virtual machines that you can get into, or shared machines that you can get into. But I would say that Linode and DigitalOcean are the like low hanging fruit ones that don't cost that much. Heroku is easiest to deploy, but costs more. Google Cloud Run is my favorite now. It's a serverless version of it. There's a lot more to actually get it going. AWS has that as well. I have used
EC2,
AWS.
right?
Thanks. Say again.
The EC2, right? Is that with AWS? Because I've always used Heroku, but you can deploy straight to AWS on EC2, I think.
So Heroku actually deploys your app on an EC2 instance, which is a virtual machine. So Heroku is built on top of AWS. AWS has a bunch of different services that you can use to deploy a Django project, but it takes a lot more learning. So does Google Cloud Platform or GCP. Python Anywhere is another one that was just mentioned that a lot of people seem to.
Is it good for production? Sorry, Justin, I interrupted you, but I wanted to ask you that. Okay, it seems like a testing environment. I've never used it, but it seems like something that you would just deploy small applications to. But hey, if it works, why not?
Good for production? It probably is, but it's up to a point, right? So once you're actually really working hard on deploying these applications, and you got a lot of traction, there's a really good chance you're going to be using Google Cloud Platform, maybe not Heroku, but Google Cloud Platform, AWS or Azure, DigitalOcean, Linode. You're gonna be using these more robust systems. So yeah, that's Python Anywhere might be up there, but I don't think Pinterest is hosted on Python Anywhere. That's kind of
that's the way I was saying it too. Yeah. All right. So yeah, we're at the end of it. Danny, funny way to go, because right as he posts this, I just see a bunch of spam comments. This is what happens when you don't have law and order.
I know.
Danny, thank you for being here, for watching the stream. Always appreciate you.
Yeah, Danny, thank you.
Yeah, Justin,
Tommy,
great.
Code with Tommy. I love having you out here too. Yeah. He's out there getting it, dude. It's cool.
I'm doing a collaboration with him actually.
You are? Oh, nice.
My wife is designing a contact list app, and she's going to send it over to him. Which, Tommy, sorry, I've not replied to you yet. I saw your message. I just don't always get to my DMs. But he's going to build out the back end, and then I have CodeStacker, Jesse from CodeStacker. He's going to do Django React, and then programming with Eric is going to do Django with Vue. So we're creating the same application with vanilla Django, then with React and Vue. So that's going to be fun. And this is all coming from one design. So yeah, we're going to collaborate there. Go to Tommy, 16 years old, and he's killing it. Starting up YouTube, doing a lot of work there.
That's awesome, man. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I'm so happy where I'm at, but like just to think starting all this when I was 16 would have been pretty interesting. Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, cool, Dennis. Right. Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Justin. Everyone, thank you for joining the chat. Sorry if we didn't get to everything, but we appreciate you guys.